All right, on this example it says the height of a right square prism is 7 inches, and the surface area of the prism is 190 inches squared. Determine A, the dimensions of the base, and then B, the volume. So we have a couple questions to answer here. And if you remember on the previous video, I said the first step is to draw a picture. In fact, the first 2 steps are to draw a picture. So it says it's a right square prism. So I'm going to draw that out. I'll draw the 3D version of it, or at least make an attempt at it. So we've got a square on top, and I know I'm drawing a rhombus here, but it's 3D. And then we'll just kind of draw the height. There we go. There's the bottom. There's the backside height. Okay, we don't know what the base dimensions are, but they said it's a square, so they have to be the same. So it might be like 5 and 5 or 6 and 6 or something like that. They did say the height is 7, and they said that the surface area is 190. So the surface area formula, this would be our next step, is both bases, 2 bases, and when I say bases, I mean area of the bases, plus the lateral area. Okay, so for this, I'm going to need to draw out the net, so let's do that. The net, there's going to be a square on top and bottom, and then here's the back side, here's another square, and then we've got the left, the right, and then this front side here is going to be attached to the right side. So that's going to be over here. Alright, so I don't know what this is, but we'll just call those sides x. So that means all these sides along here are going to be x. But we do know that the height is 7. And we know that this whole thing, when we add it up, we get a surface area of 190 inches squared. So the surface area we know is 190. And the bases are x times x, so x squared. So we've got 2 times x squared. That's the area of the bases. And then the lateral area, well, this is 7x, because 7 times x. This would be 7x, because this is x as well. This would be 7x, and that would be 7x. So altogether, the lateral area is 28x. I'm sorry, 28x. There we go. All right, so this is kind of messy. We end up with a quadratic equation here. One of the things I noticed is 190, 2, and 28 are all divisible by 2. So I'm going to divide everything by 2 here. Try to clean things up a little bit. So I get 95 equals x squared plus 14x. Okay, and so in order to solve this problem, a lot of students, their initial reaction is, well, I'm going to take the square root of both sides. But the problem is we got this 14x here, so we can't do that. So I'm going to undo that. If you do have an x squared and an x and a constant term, the way you can solve that is we're going to set one side equal to 0. So I'll subtract 95 from both sides. We end up with 0 equals x squared plus 14x minus 95. And then there's a few different ways to solve this. Chances are your teacher's shown you how to factor. So factoring is one way. You could use the quadratic formula. You could graph this and find where it crosses the x-axis. All are the same answer to this question. So I'll factor it just to kind of remind you how to factor. And this one does factor nicely. So factoring is the opposite of foiling, if your teachers use that phrase, or distributing. So we're basically undistributing. So the first 2 terms are going to be x and x, because when you multiply these, you get x squared. And then these last 2 terms have to multiply up to negative 95. So what I like to do is I just kind of make a little factor tree. I know that 1 and 95 multiply up to 95. And what I'm looking for is something that's going to add to 14. Because when we take this number times x and this number times x, Those are going to be our x terms, and they're going to have to add up to a positive 14. So I also know that 95 is divisible by 5, and it goes in there 19 times. And so we kind of got it here because we want to multiply up to negative 95. So one of these has to be negative and one positive. That means it's going to be negative 5 and positive 19. When we add these together, we get positive 14. So it's x minus 5 times x plus 19. Those are my two factors. If we multiply this out, if we distribute this, we're going to end up with x squared plus 14x minus 95. Okay, so now we're getting into some algebra when we were clearly doing geometry. So now we have two answers from this. We have x minus 5 equals 0, and x plus 19 equals 0. So why is this? Well, if we have two things, I see two separate things multiplied together equaling 0. The only way you can multiply two things to get 0 is if one of those two things is 0. 0 times anything equals 0. So either this is 0 or this is 0. All right, so that's how we came up with these two equations. So let's add 5 to both sides to solve for this one. Here we get x equals 5. We'll subtract 19, and there we get x equals negative 19. So this is not going to be an answer. We're not going to have negative side lengths on this prism. So our answer is going to be 5. Okay, so after all of that work, what did we answer? Determine A, the dimensions of the base. Well, the dimensions of the base are 5 by 5. So the answer to part A is 5 by 5. Then determine the volume. Well, the base now we figured out is 25, because that's 5 times 5 is 25. So I'll pick a new color here. We'll do red. The base is 25 inches squared. We're going to multiply that by the height, which is 7. So 25 times 7 is 175 inches cubed. So I'll kind of write out what I just did. Volume is the area of the base times the height, which is 25 times 7, which equals 175 inches cubed. All right, so there's example number 2, working backward with a right square prism.